So let me go ahead and go to this morning's message. And the title you see is, You're Not the Boss of Me. Now, I'm not going to embarrass you by asking you to raise your hand, but has your child ever said that to you? Yeah, okay? Makes you want to reach out and grab them with two hands right around the throat, right? Kids sometimes can do that. I saw it this week. And what they're saying is, I'm not going to listen to you, and there's nothing you can do to make me. And it's a crazy little scene because you got this little 30-inch being, and he's standing there, and he's, posing, and he says, "You're not the boss of me." And, it is so easy for you to cut off their food supply, to take them out of their bedroom, so many things. And so it's really a ludicrous thing for them. It is so silly. And yet, in today's passage, this is the crux, this is the core, this is the dominating note of the story about God's relationship with his people. And so they stand there and they look at God and they say, "You're not the boss of me." And you think about it, you step back, you're thinking, are you kidding? How could you say that? And so that's the story, and we're going to be getting into it in a moment. Before we do, I'll tell you, I've been doing all kinds of things to prepare for old age. Now, just because I'm now a grandfather doesn't mean I feel old or think of myself old, all right? Right now, I'm thinking of myself as somebody in my 40s. I've moved it up from the 30s. I'm getting more realistic. But I still think of myself as somebody in my 40s. And but I'm doing all the physical exercises. I'm working on my bone density so that I don't have osteoporosis. I'm working on my range of motion. So, I don't use the mirror when I'm checking the back. I want to make sure that I can turn all the way around. I'm working on balance. I'm working on all the things that I will face. One of the things I'm working on, because having been a pastor for so many years, is I got to find the right place to retire. There's a lot of places I'd like to retire to, but you may not be able to do that. So I'm looking and I'm checking every time they bring up an article that says best place to retire. I'm very interested in those articles. And if you go to AARP, okay, Association of Retired People, some of you might not know what that is, especially some of the teens. Anyway, here are some of the categories. The 10 places that are sunniest, okay? The 10 places that are the most charming. The places that are most affordable. And then they have a special category. The places where you can live for $100 a day. I'm thinking, I need to spend $100 a day? So I got a lot to learn. Here's one some of you guys will like. The best places to live if you're a sports fan. Daniel, this one's for you. The best places for those who love the outdoors. Okay? Here's one that I'm definitely not interested in. The best places for hot individuals. Okay? And finally, one other one that might be the ultimate alternative, the best place to live abroad. Okay? So anyway, I wonder, if you could choose any place to live, where would you live? Would you like Malibu? Would you like Beverly Hills? Would you like the Hollywood Hills? People love the hills, right? And the beaches. Or at the marina. Where would you like to live? And if you're a renter, you have to take one additional factor into consideration. If you're a buyer, you got to see who your neighbors are going to be, right? And if you're smart, you check that location out several times. You go in the morning, you go in the afternoon, and you go at night. You go on a weekday, you go on a weekend, because you want to see what's going on. Now, you're a renter. Have any of you ever done this? The landlord checks out the renter. Have you ever checked out the landlord before you rented? I mean, there are those landlords who use their key and the rule of law that says that if they think there's a problem, a danger, they can go into your place. And there have been landlords that will go in and want to look through your personal stuff. And so it isn't just the location. There are other factors. Some of you are looking at me like, really? There are landlords like that? Yeah, they occur in the news stories. Here, what we've got is an entirely different situation. I'm going to ask us to turn to Mark chapter 12. We've been going through the Gospel of Mark because it's a foundation for us as Christians. It's the shortest gospel, it is a chronological gospel, and so it presents the story of Jesus in a nice, brief, and orderly way so that we can know the life that has impacted the world and us so much. And I'm going to start reading, and we're going to go portion by portion so that you can follow it. And this time, I'm just going to look at verse 1. It says, he began to speak to them in parables. Jesus took the initiative because he wanted to say something to these people who were the leaders of the Jews. And so he wanted to get something into their mind that will stick. So he told a story. That's what a parable is. It says, a man planted a vineyard and put a fence around it and dug a pit for the winepress and built a tower and leased it to tenants and went into another country. Here is a trusting landowner. And basically, what you see in this verse is the goodness of this landowner and the great vineyard that he has prepared for his tenants. Years ago, one of the couples in my church wanted to get married in Napa Valley. And I says, oh, really? That's a long ways away. You know, what's there in a vineyard? Flies. And she says, no, Pastor, I want you to come up and do the wedding in Napa. And they booked this restaurant that had a balcony on the side of a hill. And we were jutting out over the hill, and we had the whole valley. And you looked at the color, you looked at the orderliness of the vineyards, and you realize, and especially when you did the tours and you looked at the ranch houses that they had there, man, these are not dirt farmers. These guys have got a nice place, a nice setup. Those vineyards were beautiful, expensive, spacious. Anyway, this is the kind of vineyard that this verse 1 is preparing for us. He didn't just say, this is the land, you work it. He planted a vineyard, he got it started, he put a fence around it, he dug the pit for the winepress, and he even built a tower, an accessory that many vineyards would not have. And Jesus, what was he doing with this? He was basically reminding the Jews, the leaders that he was talking to, of how wonderful God was in providing so much for them. He was reminding them of their origins. And you remember their origins. What job were they doing before they came to God's calling and entered into God's special land? It's not one of the college majors of any reputable university, probably not of any university. What were they doing when God called them out of Egypt? Hint, hint. They were slaves, right? They were slaves. They were part of the hardcore poor. And they would go generation after generation stuck in the lowliest of statuses. They would be like the untouchables of India. And indeed, the Jews were the untouchables of Egypt because they took care of sheep. And the Egyptians said, you take the land over there because we don't want to have you around. And so they're over there, and God calls them out. And you remember the verses that we read? I'm going to read to you a little more from another chapter, chapter 7 of Deuteronomy. It says this, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God." They weren't untouchables to God. They are holy to the Lord their God. He says, verse 6 continues, "The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possessions." Wow. The reject becomes the select. Treasured possessions out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you, right? If God was going by that, he would choose China. We would have been the chosen people. So, but God didn't do that. He says, "For you were the fewest of all peoples." God reaches down to the fewest. He says, "But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out of with a mighty hand and has redeemed you from the house of slavery." And the next verse says, "And therefore know that the Lord your God is a faithful God, who keeps his covenant, his promises, and his steadfast love with those who love him, and will keep his commandments, and he will do this for thousands of generations." Then in chapter 8 of Deuteronomy, he talks about this place. He says, "The Lord is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks, of waters, of fountains and springs flowing out of the valleys and the hills," verse 7 of chapter 8. "A land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper," verse 10, "and you shall eat and be full." And so he's reminding them of how God has lavishly provided for him in his generosity. What a stroke of luck. Not in a million years could these slaves have been imagined that they would be selected by this God and taken to a place this good. Verse 2, it says, "And when the season came, he," meaning the landowner, "sent a servant. And he sent him to the tenants to get from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. And they took him, and they beat him, and they sent him away empty-handed. Again he sent to them another servant, and they struck him on the head, and they treated him shamefully." Verse 5, "And he sent another, and him they killed. And so with many others, some they beat, some they killed." This goes on over a whole long period of time. And they're treating these guys that are his representatives, these agents, so shamefully. And God is waiting. He's waiting because he knows that it's going to take time for the people to grow up, to learn to appreciate, to learn to trust. And so he is forbearing. This God is anything but controlling. He puts up with a lot. He cuts them so much slack. And this slack is either going to turn into rope that they can use to pull themselves forward, or it's going to be rope that they're going to hang themselves with. What's in it for God? What's in it that he's going to get? And the answer is nothing. Nothing at all. It's called grace. On God's side, it's all about love, all for these people. Remember last week we were mentioning 1 Corinthians 13, those verses that talk about agape love, the love of God. And it started off with God as what? That little thing, patience, the beginning of love. But it ended with bearing all things, enduring all things, hoping all things, believing all things. This is the kind of God who endures and forbears and puts up with all kinds of guff, all kinds of sass. First, we see the portrait of God being lavishly kind and good. Second, we see the picture of God who is forbearing, who is not waiting for our every mistake and then coming down on us like a ton of bricks. And I need to say that because a lot of people have this idea of God according to religion, but not God according to the Bible. And they always walk around afraid that if I do one little thing wrong, if I slip out of line just a little bit, there's going to be lightning hitting me, or if not me, at least hitting my car and damaging it. Something, immediate punishment. And God is not like that. He's patient, giving us time to grow up. When I was in my mid-50s, I loved to say to people about myself, I'm still growing up. And I am. Every day I learn new stuff. Since coming to this church, I have learned so much new stuff. I have seen myself change. I have seen myself mature. I have seen myself age. Well, you've seen me age too. But see, you see that growth never stops. And I'm going to just keep growing right into eternity. And it'll take me all of eternity to continue moving to where I want to be. And so he gives us that room and that time, and he forbears. And then we come to verse 6. This is what it says. He had still one other. Surprise, surprise, a beloved son. What's he going to do with the son? Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And they took him, and they killed him, and they threw him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyards to others. The rejection of their son, of this man's son, shows how hard their heart had become. Instead of growing, instead of softening, they became harder and harder with each time. They didn't understand the mercy and grace that was theirs. And so they finally crossed the line in their lawlessness. And so here Jesus is surprising the Jewish leaders. He's telling them, I know you're going to kill me. I know that's your plan and your desire, and I know that's what's going to happen. And I'm not afraid. I'm going to go right into it. But there will be a judgment day. Hebrews 9:27 says, just as it is appointed for mortals to die once, and after that, the judgment. See, the tenants forgot that the mercy of God is meant to bring us to change. They thought God had no judgment day, no payday. Romans 2:4 says, or do you presume on the riches of God's kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? And so he shocks them at this point, realizing there will be a judgment. But he says one other thing, the very last part of that verse, and he will give the vineyard to others. And that's when he opens the door for most of the rest of us. That God doesn't give up on his plan, but his vineyard will see its potential when replacements were brought in. He is not stuck with the original tenants. And so, the parable ends right here. Now, Jesus is going to punch through with one final last statement in verse 10 and 11. Because the parable's over, but he's going to quote an Old Testament prophecy, and he's going to use that prophecy to speak to himself, about himself, to all of us. It says, have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. See, Jesus is changing the storyline entirely. We're not talking about vineyards and grapes anymore. Now we're talking about a building and a cornerstone, okay? Because he needs to do it to get his further point across. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And what he's doing is, with the dead son, he can't tell them they're going to be resurrecting the dead son in the vineyard. And so he changes and talks about a rejected stone, because he is going to come back, and he's going to be the foundation. He's going to be the basis for a new people to come in and become his people. And so this P.S. becomes the most exciting part of this whole thing. He takes his prophecy and he applies it to himself, and then when he closes and he says, this is the Lord's doing and it's marvelous in our eyes, he applies it to all of us. Because this is where we find out that the story of rejected stones isn't just about Jesus. The story of rejected stones is about all of us. I once saw a TV story about a woman who made these beautiful murals on walls, on the city walls. And she did not have a whole lot of resources. She wasn't making money for it. She was doing it just to beautify her community. And she didn't have the ability to buy all these expensive tiles. So you know what she did? She went to the dump, and she found the cast-off pottery by all the people. And she would take whatever she could find, and she would bring it home, and she would crack it and break it into little pieces. And out of all those pieces, she would make these beautiful, beautiful murals. You know other people who work with junk to make art? There's many people who do that. And God does the same thing. He takes rejected stones and he uses them. Because when he made us, he says, I make each of you in my image and in my likeness. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And so just because you get rejected, just because others have despised you, I do not. I reclaim, I recover, I restore, and I put together into something great and grand. And so that's what God does. And he's always been doing it. We read how he took these cast-off people, these slaves, these long-term, hardcore, generation after generation of slaves. And he took them and made them into a new people of his own, a treasured possession. But he doesn't just do it with whole groups. He does it with individuals. Starting from the very beginning of the Bible all the way through. Remember the story of Noah? Remember how they laughed at him? Thought he was a lunatic? If Noah lived today, they would have called the psychiatric patrol, the PET team they're called, and they would have come and picked up Noah and thrown him in for a 72-hour lockup to have his mental capacity evaluated. They laughed at him mercilessly for such a long time. And then what happened? The waters came, and the rejected stone became the cornerstone of a whole new humanity. And I can go on with people like Joseph, rejected by his siblings, Jeremiah, rejected by his countrymen, thrown into a pit and left to suffer, to be harmed. Moses, rejected by even his countrymen when he was taking a risk to do good. Samuel and his sons being rejected as judge after a long career. David being rejected, belittled by father and siblings. Then we come to the New Testament. And Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount says, blessed are the needy, the shamed, the hurting. He says, blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the ones who are hungry and thirsty. One of my all-time favorite singing groups is Simon and Garfunkel. You guys still remember Simon and Garfunkel? Show of support here. All right. I'm not the only old guy. Okay? They had a song called Blessed. And I like the way they paraphrased the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit. Blessed is the Lamb whose blood flows. Blessed are the sat upon, spat upon, ratted on. Have you ever been spat upon, ratted upon, sat on? One day my son says, Mom, Dad, you don't know how our sister treated us when we were young. Oh, what did she do? She picked on us. What did she do? Sometimes she would sit on us. Really? Your sister did that? You know? We all experience that kind of a thing. Call it discrimination, but all kinds of things. And so this is what God comes to do. He comes to say, this vineyard is planted. And if you're one of those who's ever known what it was to be left out, to be deprived, to be rejected, to be the butt of jokes, to be the outcast, the guy who didn't fit in, the one who had nothing. I was at my niece's wedding banquet, and the groomsmen talked about the groom. And they talked about how when they met him in school, everybody else had the baggy pants and the fancy shoes, and he came in the same old shirt, and he came in the same old drawstring pants. He was a new immigrant, okay? And so he suffered. Now they're best friends. Made fun of because of your poverty. When I was in law school, my best friend was a kid named Mark. I've mentioned him, smart kid from New York, who was only Jewish for his grandmother's sake. He says, you know, Ken, you're not the only one to be picked on. They pick on me because of my red hair. I said, red hair? And you know, that's what I knew, because of sin. If people can find a reason to pick on you and reject you, they'll do that. I remember arriving at my high school, and there was this beautiful girl. And somebody said, oh, you should have seen her in junior high. She was so beautiful. But she was so beautiful, all the other girls hated her. And so she started to put on weight so that she wouldn't stand out so much. And when I saw her, you could still see she was beautiful. But yeah, she was putting on weight. She had been made to suffer. She had become persecuted. Why? It wasn't her fault. And you know, by the end of the 11th grade, she was no longer at our school. She was a rejected stone. But, you know, we all, at some point in our lives, have been rejected stones. New immigrants are rejected stones. And this cruelty, this hurt, stays with us. And God comes and he reclaims us and patiently restores us and helps us to see that his love is greater than the sin and the cruelty that we have received, that we have experienced. This is a good God, a great God, who wants to give us so much in the way of benefits and life. This is a God who is forbearing and who gives us the time to grow up. But eventually, this is a God who's got to say, you know, you've crossed the line. You've waited too long, and I can't allow it to go on anymore. Otherwise, justice is forgotten and forfeited. So, what does it say to me? It says this: I won't let the things in my life, the hurts, the problems I had growing up, cause me to have a continuing sense of rejection, inadequacy, low self-esteem. I won't let those things break my spirit and my hopes, because that belongs to the world, and I belong to God. I will trust, and I will believe, and I will be a part of his vineyard, to be one of those living stones, to say yes to God. Second, it says to me that I will not do the work of sin, that I'm not going to be one of those who is a rejecter and I side with those who reject and who hurt and who stigmatize. I will remember that there is a judgment coming. Third, you know, if God is reclaiming me to use me as a living stone, I want to be significant. I want to dedicate myself. I want to do something for God. There was a lady living in the far end of the city. She was rejected. She was an outcast. And one day, some Jews came by, spies, and she gave them shelter. And her name was Rahab. And God took that rejected stone and used her in his living house. And she became one of the ancestors of Jesus, a prostitute who had to live away from the main of society. God's always ready and willing to do whatever. It's going to be different for each of us, but it's amazing stuff. So, and then finally, it says to me, I will live my life saying, yes, Lord, I love you back. And I'm going to give whatever I can so that my song isn't just a one-time act on a stage, but it's a continuous song saying, I love you back. That's what it says to me. And I hope it says many of the same things to you in the special area of your life where you would need to be able to experience that. Give you lift, give you power, give you a smile for your face. Let me go ahead and close in prayer. Father, we come to you and we thank you. We thank you for this story of your power to recover and to turn junk into great things, to make the rejection to be a selection to your eternal purposes. Lord, we come to you and we ask that you open our spiritual eyes and we will believe these things deeply so that our lives would be filled with the power of knowing it as a certainty. Bless your people here. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.